deadly microbes, but now has mercury, which the only places it's actually okay to have on the planet, mercury, is in vaccines, your tooth, or toxic landfill. So if you were to drop a vaccine at a vaccine clinic onto the floor, the hazmat guys would come in. You're not allowed to just pick it up if it's a mercury-containing vaccine. The hazmat people have to come and take that away. Yet we're okay to take, a portion of that vial and inject it into, a 3-month-old child. How does that work?
Vaccines are often hailed as one of the greatest achievements in modern medicine. But what if that story isn't as straightforward as we've been told? Suzanne Humphries, a nephrologist turned vocal critic of vaccination policy, raises questions that few dare to address openly. She challenges the widely accepted narrative by revisiting historical data and case reports that have been buried or dismissed. To put this in perspective, consider that in the early 20th century, death rates from diseases like smallpox and diphtheria were already in steep decline before vaccines became widely available. In fact, historical records show that improvements in sanitation, nutrition, and living conditions played a massive role. For example, the smallpox death rate in England had decreased by over 90% by the time the vaccine was introduced nationwide. This information complicates the simple story that vaccines alone eradicated these diseases. Humphrey suggests we need to re-examine the assumption that vaccines are the sole heroes of public health. Could it be that medical advances outside of vaccination had already done most of the heavy lifting? This is not to dismiss vaccines outright, but to demand a more honest and nuanced discussion. One of the more controversial points Suzanne Humphries raises involves the heavy metals used in vaccines as adjuvants, substances meant to provoke a stronger immune response. Aluminum and mercury, in the form of thimerosal, have long been components in many vaccines. The concern? These metals are neurotoxic and can accumulate in the body.
Deadly microbes, but now has mercury, which the only places it's actually okay to have on the planet, mercury, is in vaccines, your tooth, or toxic landfill. So if you were to drop a vaccine at a vaccine clinic onto the floor, the hazmat guys would come in. You're not allowed to just pick it up if it's a mercury-containing vaccine. The hazmat people have to come and take that away. Yet we're okay to take, a portion of that vial and inject it into, a 3-month-old child. How does that work?
Scientific studies show that aluminum exposure can increase blood pressure and contribute to neurological damage. Mercury, a well-known neurotoxin, has been linked to immune dysfunction and developmental issues. What's troubling, according to Humphries and others, is that these substances may not be fully cleared from the body, potentially causing long-term health effects. Critics often dismiss these concerns as fringe science, but hair mineral analyses and chelation tests used by some integrative doctors have revealed elevated aluminum and mercury burdens in certain patients. If these metals contribute to conditions like hypertension or neurological problems, it raises a critical question. Why is there resistance to researching and removing these toxic burdens? Suzanne Humphries doesn't just criticize vaccines. She also exposes what she sees as systemic suppression of dissenting voices in medicine. According to her, doctors and scientists who question vaccine safety or effectiveness often face professional isolation, censorship, or even the threat of losing their licenses. This isn't speculation. Historically, medical establishments have acted to maintain a unified front. For instance, in the mid-20th century, doctors warning about vaccine complications were frequently labeled as quacks or conspiracy theorists. Today, social media platforms and academic journals often remove or ignore critical research or testimonials. Why does this matter? Because science thrives on debate, challenges, and ongoing inquiry. When the conversation is shut down prematurely, public trust erodes. People start wondering what is being hidden, leading to growing skepticism, not just of vaccines, but of the entire healthcare system. During her Joe Rogan interview, Humphries recounted personal clinical experiences, including cases where adults developed severe hypertension following vaccinations like tetanus shots. While official medical literature often dismisses such case reports as anecdotal or inconclusive, the accumulation of these stories cannot be ignored. Let's consider malignant hypertension, a sudden and dangerous spike in blood pressure that can lead to stroke or organ failure. If vaccines can trigger this in susceptible individuals, what does that say about the blanket safety assumptions? There are documented cases, some published in peer-reviewed journals, linking vaccines to adverse effects ranging from neurological disorders to autoimmune diseases. Although these cases are rare relative to the number of vaccinations given, the absolute numbers are not insignificant when millions are vaccinated every year. The refusal to thoroughly investigate these adverse events fuels mistrust. It creates a sense that economic or political interests may be prioritized over individual health. One of the most provocative claims made by Humphries is the misunderstanding of cholesterol and inflammation in medicine. The mainstream narrative brands cholesterol as bad and something to be aggressively lowered. However, cholesterol is actually part of the body's healing process. It responds to inflammation, which is the real underlying threat. In fact, inflammation is at the root of many chronic diseases. Vaccination itself causes an inflammatory response, which in some cases may trigger or exacerbate chronic health issues. If inflammation is not properly managed, it can lead to long-term damage, such as heart disease or autoimmune disorders. This flips the typical health advice on its head. Instead of demonizing cholesterol, should we focus more on controlling inflammation? And if vaccines contribute to systemic inflammation, however rarely, should we reconsider their blanket use? It's impossible to ignore the financial backdrop to vaccination programs. The global vaccine market is worth tens of billions of dollars annually, with major pharmaceutical companies reaping massive profits.
And there's a real science in nutritional deficiencies and what a negative impact it has. This is all real. And if they truly cared about you, they would be telling you about that as a primary way of defending your body against disease and against all sorts of things that could go wrong. All sorts of things, like get fit, eat healthy, and you're above everything.
Humphries argues that this financial incentive creates conflicts of interest. The industry's goal, she claims, is less about healing and more about maintaining a steady customer base, keeping people dependent on ongoing treatments rather than cures. Evidence shows that aggressive vaccine schedules and mandates boost sales. Additionally, pharmaceutical companies have powerful lobbying groups that influence public health policies worldwide. This raises ethical questions. Are vaccine policies always driven by science, or are they sometimes driven by profit? History shows that public health victories often come from simple improvements in sanitation, clean water, nutrition, and hygiene, not just medical interventions. For example, the dramatic decline in infectious diseases in the 19th and early 20th centuries paralleled improvements in living standards rather than mass vaccination. Humphries emphasizes these facts to argue for a more holistic approach to health, one that prioritizes lifestyle, environment, and nutrition alongside or even before medical treatments. This perspective challenges the one-size-fits-all vaccine narrative and opens the door for alternative health strategies that empower individuals and communities, rather than relying solely on pharmaceutical interventions. What Suzanne Humphries represents is a call for courage. Courage to question established dogmas, to look at inconvenient facts, and to demand transparency. Science is not infallible. It is a human endeavor, subject to error, bias, and manipulation. The history of medicine includes many examples where prevailing ideas were later overturned by new evidence. If we want a truly healthy society, we must foster open dialogue, rigorous inquiry, and respect for all voices, including those challenging the mainstream. So, where do we go from here? Humphries suggests more independent research free from industry influence, more openness to patient experiences, and more personalized healthcare that considers individual susceptibilities. She advocates for critical thinking in public health decisions and warns against blind obedience to any medical authority. While vaccines have undoubtedly saved lives, a mature society must acknowledge limits, risks, and alternatives. This balanced approach may help rebuild public trust, reduce polarization, and lead to safer, more effective health policies. Suzanne Humphries' claims challenge us to rethink what we accept as medical truth. This is not a rejection of science, but a plea for its integrity. Her story reminds us that progress demands skepticism and courage. Whether you agree or disagree, these conversations matter. They shape our health, our freedoms, and our future. Remember, history's proudest triumphs can have shadows. It's up to us to shine a light.